I'm Susan Ramspacker. I'm actually a consultant with MOST, which is the Madison Out of School Time Network Collaboration that's run by the city and MSCR and the school district. And we have a small grant from New York Life Foundation to try to kind of align SEL across our city and our communities. I mean, we are open to outside of the Madison area too. And to do that, we're just trying to look at what are we all doing? What do we all think about SEL? And how might we kind of come up with some common language or common goals, core ways that we're all trying to weave SEL in similar ways together into our work, so that if a young person went to a school and then went to an after school program, they might hear some of the same kinds of concepts. They might be inspired in the same ways to grow and thrive. And in order to do that, we're going to pull together some of these training sessions, and then we're going to do some meetings and planning together. So we invited Cynthia Moore from the school district to start us off with really looking at SEL through Madison School District's lens. So I'm just going to let Cynthia take it away and get us going.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan. So again, my name is Cynthia Moore, she, her, hers. I work in the Department of Student and Staff Support in MMSD. That's the department that houses our lead psych social workers, as well as our PBIS coaches. The work that I do is primarily involved in the areas of social emotional learning, as well as restorative justice and mindfulness. So thank you for having me here today. And I will share my screen in a moment, but before I start, I did want to give you just a brief overview of where Madison was pre-pandemic. It had been some time since we had really taken a deep look at social emotional learning. So in March of 2019, I was asked just to get like, what is the current state of SEL in MMSD? You know, what is going on? What are some of the needs? I, along with a few other people, just started on that journey of saying, okay, you know, what is SEL? How do we define it? What does it look like? And of course, it looked very different across schools. It looked very different across levels. And so we found ourselves really thinking about how do we reboot SEL and also do research around what are the promising practices around social emotional learning. And we really found that there was a need to really rethink how we do social emotional learning in a way that considers cultural context. So as we go through the course of our learning today, you'll see where we're lifting these pieces of really grounding in context and how social emotional learning has or hasn't served our Black and Brown students. So with that said, get started. We're going to do some introductions. I'm just kind of looking at time, so I may skip through some things, but let me just see if this works. I just have to do a little moving of things around on the screen so that I can access. So once again, our learning for today, I won't read through all of that, but it's really grounding in why social emotional learning is important. And once again, looking at that MMSD lens, kind of recognizing and just doing a beginning grounding in the what and why of social emotional learning, construct an understanding of social emotional learning through a transformative lens, and then examine SEL through a racial and justice oriented lens. Are there any questions regarding that? Okay, so I thought for, our icebreaker today, because no meeting or PD would be a PD without an icebreaker, if you could just share your name, your role, and something that has brought you joy in the last few days. And if I could just get a brave person to start.
I can start. So my name's Ian Hanna, and I work with MSCR, Madison School of Community Recreation. I supervise middle and high school programs with MSCR. And for me, really just the the joy place that I focus on. I'm a parent, so going through these pretty challenging times in a lot of different ways, I just try to focus on my kids and trying to stay positive and get as much just sort of positive connection and moving forward as possible with them. So that's what I try to focus on. Should I pick another person or just pass?
You get that chance to pass it
Okay, so
off.
there's only 4 people on my screen right now, so and I'm one of them. So Billy Joe, you're next.
Sounds good. I'm Billy Jo Hine. I am a support specialist for the middle school programs with MSCR, formerly a site director in elementary school for a lot of years. Something that has brought me joy in the last few days, I'm going to do a totally non-work related joy. Last night I met with my family for dinner. Kind of my mom's birthday is on Friday, so we just were kind of doing a early celebration type of thing and just got together and had a little bit of small group family time. So that was just something that was really something that brought me some joy and laughter last night. So, and I will pass it to John Gullickson.
My name is John. I'm an AmeriCorps member, a past AmeriCorps member, and I'm at Meadowood Neighborhood Center. And something that's brought me joy is in ELA, we're doing a unit on zoos right now, and our kids have been doing pretty well. So at the end, I've been taking them to the San Diego Zoo virtually. So that's been really fun to watch. And I'll pass it to Miles.
Hi, I'm Miles. I'm an AmeriCorps member with PASS at the Vera Court Neighborhood Center. One thing that brought me joy today was I had my favorite breakfast of avocado toast.
Can you pass it to someone, Miles?
Let's see. What else do I have on my screen here? How about Ian?
Well, I'd love to go, but I have gone already. So I could pass it to Susan.
How about Ian O'Connor?
Yeah, I think you.
There's 2 Ians, Ian.
Oh, that so rarely happens that I should know because I know Ian. So sorry about that.
No problem. I'm Ian O'Connor Giles. I'm a past AmeriCorps member with MSCR at La Follette High School. Something that's brought me joy has been, I guess, just like reading some good books for book clubs, for after school book clubs. And I'll pass it to Anna.
Hi, my name's Anna. I'm a past AmeriCorps member as well. And something that brought me joy, I think it was like Monday. I was like, for some reason, with the food I was eating, I was mostly vegan. And I don't know why that brought me joy, but it was just cool to see like I ate all vegan food in one day. So, or like food that, yeah, you know what I mean. But anyway, I'll pass it on to Bonnie.
Thanks, Anna. I'm Bonnie Erickson. I'm the coordinator with the Past AmeriCorps program. So the members on the call I see pretty regularly. So it's great to see you all here today. And something that brought me joy on Sunday, I had a really nice long talk with my grandma. So a phone call with my grandma. She lives in Kansas. She's 91. She's very isolated with COVID. But it was cool. I told her about how I came upon a turtle earlier this summer, and she has like a wealth of knowledge of reptiles and amphibians. Like that's what she did, was like take reptiles and amphibians to schools and teach kids about them. So she was just telling me all this stuff, and she's like, "Oh, well, did it have this? Did it have that? Like, did you take it home? Did you rescue it?" I was like, "No, I just saw it and, like off the sidewalk and kept going." But it was just really cool, you know, that even being 91, like she's very like of sound mind and had like a lot of great knowledge to share with me. So that was a highlight of my week. And I will pass it to Alexandria.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say that my dog has brought me joy this week, and he brings me joy every week. He's just really big, and he sleeps all around the apartment, really cute all the time. So I will pass it to Elena.
Hello, my name is Elena. I am the MSCR Site Director and Urban League Tutor Coordinator at Blackhawk Middle School on the north side. Woot woot. Something that brought me joy specifically today was the sun just like beaming through the windows. I felt like I was coming alive again. And yeah, it was really nice to see that and to be outside this morning. So I will pass it to Andrew.
Good morning, all. My name is Andrew Schilker. I'm the Director of Middle School Programs at the Urban League of Greater Madison. A number of my team members are on this training as well. And one thing that brought me joy in the last couple of days was watching Bucky just destroy Michigan. That's always a good time. And then I will pass it to... Who haven't we heard from? Miles, maybe?
No, I think we might have heard from everybody.
I went.
Oh.
Except for Cynthia, did you share your joy?
I did not, but I will share my joy is on my Facebook timeline, you know, because every kind of sport is shut down right now. From previous years, some of my son's swim videos are coming up on the Facebook timeline. So it's always a pleasant surprise. I used to complain when I had to sit 4-hour swim meets for your child to swim for like 30 seconds, but I'm kind of reminiscing and wishing for those times again. So being able to see those videos again kind of gives me that sense of joy.
That's lovely.
Yes. Okay. And just Susan, I'm just going to ask too if you could be kind of the chat monitor. I can only see a few people at a time, so please feel free. I'm pretty flexible in terms of facilitation. Jump in, or if you have a question or need me to pause, just let me know. So,
Cynthia, before you dive a little deeper, is anyone having Cynthia's audio coming in and out a little?
Okay.
Yeah.
Our district has been having trouble with the audio, so thank you for letting me know. Let me just try.
You put yourself on mute.
Does that sound any better? Or is it still breaking up?
Maybe better.
Thumbs up, or there's reactions here, so you can kind of let me know if that's better.
I think that's better.
Okay, we'll go with it. If it happens again, then I'll try the next thing. It's a bunch of workarounds that we need to do. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, let me start sharing here. Okay, so just wanted to start off, as we talk about social emotional learning with the definition of what it is from a traditional standpoint. And this will set the groundwork of like how we got to where we are in MMSD as we think about social emotional learning. So on the screen here are two definitions of social emotional learning. One is the traditional definition from social emotional learning from Castle. Can I just get a volunteer to just read the SEL definition?
Social and emotional learning, SEL, is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions.
Thank you, Billy Joe. And then if I could have someone read the definition of transformational SEL.
Transformational SEL is a process where students and teachers build strong, respectful relationships found on an appreciation of similarities and differences, learn to critically examine root causes of inequity, and develop collaborative solutions to community and social problems.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, I couldn't see who that was, but thank you. So Now, as we once again went back to re-examining how we did SEL and MMSD, part of this process was kind of looking at like, what are the definitions out there? What are, other districts doing? What are kind of the new innovative things in SEL? And we really landed on this piece of like, how do we blend, how we traditionally think about social emotional learning to this concept of transformational social emotional learning, which we'll get into a little bit as we go through our learning today. But it was as we thought about what our values and beliefs were in MMSD of like, how do we take the best of both of those definitions and come up with a definition that embodies like who we are. So I'll go ahead and read this one. This is what we landed upon in our district as a definition of social emotional learning, or a vision as we call it. It's the process where children and adults acquire and apply the skills necessary to build and maintain authentic relationships. Centered on student identities and youth voice, social emotional learning engages learners in strengthening their academic and social emotional skill development, cultivate innate abilities, understand and process their own emotions, set goals, feel and show empathy for others, and critically examine root causes of inequity to promote racial and social justice. So once again, as our team looked at social emotional learning, we felt that piece of like, where, it was like embodied in terms of like, we needed to, center student identities. There wasn't really this place to capture youth voice in social emotional learning in the ways that we have done it in the past. So as we built this definition, we vetted it with community members, as well as students, as well as staff, to make sure the definition that we created was really a collective definition that had voice and gave people input and ownership into the definition. So it really marked a shift for us on how we do things as a district. So this next slide illustrates, how SEL comes alive and what it looks like in action in our district. And this model is from the Aspen Institute. It's the SEED model. And it's described as like three-legged stool in which social emotional learning rests on. So when we think about it in our district, SEL comes alive in three ways. It's the explicit social emotional learning, and teaching. It's about creating safe and equitable learning environments, and then embedded SEL within other content areas. And, number three really comes into play as we think about our middle school and high schools, and knowing that, research has shown that, not the best way, but the most effective way in which to implement SEL is embedded in the content areas. Because we all know our middle schools and high schools are really pressed for time. So the standalone social emotional learning without context, it makes it very difficult for students to connect as well as adults to connect with. So just to break this model down a little bit more, just to see where it currently is living and where we're going. And once again, going back to that definition is ideal. We're fully aware that we are not to this point where we are doing SEL through this transformative lens. Is where we would like to be, and have it be part of our culture in the water that we swim in. So, and that is where we're moving towards. So when we talk about breaking down kind of that SEL in action, the teaching and practicing social emotional learning, cognitive skills, those are explicit SEL lessons that are really, come alive at the elementary level. Currently, we use second steps, given that we are in the space of pandemic. We have built out some additional lessons that incorporate teaching tolerance, welcoming schools lessons. So we've embedded those into our current social emotional learning lessons. And then it's also thinking about how do we support students in generalizing these skills, because knowing just teaching and stand alone is not enough for our students then to be able to carry over those lessons. So really looking for those opportunities or those teachable moments to generalize those social emotional skills that students are learning. And then safe and relationship-based equitable environments. So in this virtual space, we've been really focused on how do we engage students. So what engagement strategies can we use to help students feel connected in a space where, we're in front of computer screens, and feeling that authentic connection can be very difficult. So we've been very focused on building out our engagement strategies. We do have this tool that's called our virtual engagement tool, which gives tips and ideas for teachers and staff to do activities that will help build that engagement. And then more importantly, and something that we've often found that was missing in conversations around social emotional learning, or how we've done it in the past, is really being explicit about focusing on mindsets, beliefs, and values. And this can be tricky at times, because it's not this tangible thing that we can always measure in a quantitative way, but it's really this qualitative work on understanding that we have to tend to the mindsets and the beliefs. If we are going to teach students skills of social emotional learning, we also have to be reflective on how we show up in spaces, and what our awareness and our own social emotional learning skills. So within this, we have also taken a focus on adult social emotional learning, and really calling the importance of that out as well. So we are doing work alongside the student social emotional learning around adult social emotional learning. And then the gray piece of the pie here is embedding social emotional and cognitive skills into academic learning. So that's, once again, kind of really thinking about how we're integrating SEL across the curriculum. And also, similar to what we're doing with the explicit SEL lessons, how are we leveraging those teachable moments? How are we taking in what students are seeing in the world around them, and using that to teach, and to be that springboard to social emotional learning? So that's how social emotional learning is living in MMSD. That is our ideal. To be fully transparent, it's a road that we're on. This marks a huge shift in how we've done social emotional learning. So we are in the infancy stage of this work, and we're doing it virtually. So it was our plan before we shut down to go through and revamp social emotional learning standards, and really focus in on standards that center the experiences of our Black, Brown youth, as well as our LGBTQIA youth, as well as adding social emotional standards that focus on racial and social justice. And so that was our plans. We went into quarantine, so we've been trying to get back on board with doing some of that work, and hopefully we'll start some of that work in December, as well as re-examining the social emotional learning curriculum at the elementary level. Just going to pause for a moment just to see if there's any questions. Okay. So this next slide, I just wanted to lift, and I won't go into details for it. Each school has a school improvement plan. They refer to it as the SIP. We're kind of in the 2.0 version of our school improvement plans. And it's really ways that schools think about how they're doing kind of the business of school is what I refer to it as. And it's really grounded in these kind of multi-dimensions of engagement. So it's how are we examining race, rigor, and relationships, and how that impacts our engagement with our family, students, and staff. So this is kind of what the foundation that our school improvement plans are built upon. And then within that, we look at how social emotional learning aligns with this. And so how are we making, relationships come to life through social emotional learning? And also, how are we also creating those sense of belonging in schools, which that is fundamental to what we're thinking about as we roll out social emotional learning, is like, how are we creating this sense of belonging for our students? And then with that, when we think about that intersection of social emotional learning and academics, what role does rigor play in that? And how are we also making it so that it's not a either or, that you have to have race or rigor, but that these all can, align with each other. And so we're not doing, it's not like a zero-sum game where if you have one, you don't have the other. Oops. So as you think about the work you do, your settings, and taking it back to the slide, and I can put that slide up again. In what ways does your work, and this is just a pause and a silent reflection. You can definitely drop some things in the chat. I just cannot see the chat. So if you do utilize the chat, and I invite you to do that, just what ways does the work you do support, or uplift race, rigor, and relationships? And I can go back to that slide if people just want to.
So I dropped in there that LCEC, where I used to work, I feel like they focus a lot on relationships and a sense of belonging around racial identity and really around any identity that a young person, the multiple identities that we all have. And so, yeah, rigor, rigor.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Can you reflect on? I've got Miles. I think we engage a sense of belonging and teamwork. Oh, that's nice. Encourage a sense of belonging and teamwork. It's lovely to have community building and the relationships across, not just with you. Yeah, great.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's deeply relational. We all know working, with kids and even staff to staff, and like this is, intense work, and a lot of it does hinge on creating those, those sense of belonging, so that students feel seen and heard. So, yes, thank you for sharing that.
And that's one of the things about the transformative SEL that's lovely, that elevating the importance of relationship. It felt like in the original versions of SEL, it was more about each young person's change and mindset. And this is really acknowledging that, we're not islands and we are in relation with each other. That's lovely.
That goes back to, I hear a lot when we talk about restorative justice, that we're all interconnected, and so what happens to one, happens to others. So, it's just, and it brings up a whole bunch of other things, the pebble and the ripple in the ocean. I mean, I can go, a million places with that. Yeah, it really is about how we're centering relationships and belonging. And with that said, that's a great segue. And I'm sorry, this slide, it comes out a bit distorted. How's my voice? If someone could just give me a thumbs up, I can see people now. Okay, awesome, great. So this is kind of our why, and like, how did we come to this? And knowing that long before we knew that social emotional learning, it's been done in the district for years. We had established that, why we do it. But really coming back and examining, this slide here is a snapshot of our culture and climate survey that we give out every year. We didn't do it last year, of course, because it usually comes out sometime in March, and by then we had shut down. But every year we give this survey, and it's for students, staff, and for parents. And we, a lot of the schools go really deep into looking at their culture and climate data. And then we do this at the district level. And we were really kind of, taken aback by, the number of students that were saying that, that they felt belonging or didn't feel like they belong. And you can see it here. I broke it down just by groups. And once again, this is not all encompassing, but just looking at our Black, our Latinx, and our Asian students, and kind of those ratings of belonging, and knowing that, if we're doing things where we feel we're doing it kind of with fidelity and there's that connection, we want to see that in the 80% range. So this told us there's a lot of work that we need to do in terms of our students feeling like they belong, that they feel safe, and they feel valued. There are also measures on the survey that I didn't put on this slide that talked about, seeing their culture reflected in their schools. And those numbers were still, well below that 80%. So there's this understanding that we really need to think about how we need to shift what we're doing, because the way we were doing it, with no ill intentions, it was not working for a good segment of our community. So once we established that, okay, this importance of this belonging, we really wanted to message to those folks in the room who are those scientists, because you always have the heart folks, who are kind of like me, the restorative justice and the mindfulness, but there's also those folks who are really kind of that, I need to know that hard why, the science behind it. And so this next slide, and I should say this whole slide deck that I'm going through right now was a mandatory part of our welcome back around SEL through a transformative lens. So the slides I'm sharing with you today, all staff in the district got during our welcome back. So this slide really just outlines, in order to learn, we talk about this importance of academics and we talk about rigor. But in order to learn, these basic needs need to be met. And, it brings me back to Maslow's, hierarchy of needs. To fully engage our students in the learning, they need to feel like first kind of I'm safe. So really looking at that, what we call that, the brainstem and that reptilian brain. Like first, do I have a sense of safety? Then kind of moving up to that limbic system. Am I loved or am I seen? And then, once they feel that those needs have been met, then they can get into that, executive state where they're engaging that prefrontal lobe and that learning occurs. And it's like, what can I learn from this? So we really wanted to articulate to our staff that these basic emotional needs and these survival needs need to be met to really fully engage student learning. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to watch a video by Dena Simmons. And I have to say, a lot of our work has been grounded in the work of Dena Simmons, as well as Bettina Love. I don't know if folks are familiar with Bettina Love. She's been to Madison a couple of times, and she wrote the book, Want to Do More Than Survive. And so they're kind of the people that we've been really turning to in terms of like setting our beliefs, values, and philosophy around SEL. So we're going to watch this video, and then we're going to go into breakouts. The video is about 10 minutes long, and I am keeping an eye on time. So we'll watch the video, and then maybe we'll go into breakouts for another 10 minutes. We'll go into either triads or in groups of 4, depending on the numbers. And we'll process around the following prompts. But I'm going to start the video. I should say Dena Simmons works at the Yale Institute for Social Emotional Learning. She's also done several talks with the Abolitionist Teacher Network over the course of the summer. Some of you may have seen those videos as well. So let me do a little tech break here. I'm sharing my sound. One here. Sound good?
So my journey began in the Bronx, New York, in a 1-bedroom apartment with my 2 sisters and immigrant mother. I loved our neighborhood. It was lively. There was always merengue blasting, neighbors socializing on building stoops, and animated conversations over domino playing. It was home, and it was sweet, but it wasn't simple. In fact, everyone at school knew the block where we lived because it was where people came to buy weed and other drugs. And with drug dealing comes conflict, so we often went to sleep to the sound of gunshots. I spent much of my childhood worried about our safety. And so did our mother. She worried that the violence we witnessed would overtake our lives, that our poverty meant that the neighbors with whom we lived and shared space would harm us. Our entire life was in the Bronx, but my mother's anxiety spurred her into action, and soon we were driving so fast to Connecticut, to boarding school campuses with full scholarships in tow. Man, don't underestimate the power of a mother determined to keep her children safe. At boarding school, for the first time, I was able to sleep without worry. I could leave my dorm room unlocked, walk barefoot in the grass, and look up to see a night sky full of stars. Happy novelties. But there were other novelties as well. Very quickly, I felt like I didn't belong. I learned that I didn't speak the right way, and to demonstrate the proper ways of speaking, my teachers gave me frequent lessons in public on the appropriate way to enunciate certain words. A teacher once instructed me in the hallway, asking. She said this loudly. Dena, it's not axing like you're running around with an axe. That's silly. Now, at this point, you could imagine the snickers of my classmates. But she continued. Think about breaking the word into ass and king, and then put the two together to say it correctly. Asking. There were some other moments that reminded me that I didn't belong. Once I walked into a classmate's dorm room and I watched her watch her valuables around me. Like, why would she do that? Thought to myself. And then there was the time when another classmate walked into my dorm room and yelled, "Ew," as I was applying hair grease to my scalp. There is emotional damage done when young people can't be themselves, when they are forced to edit who they are in order to be acceptable. It's a kind of violence. Ultimately, I'm a quintessential success story. I attended boarding school and college in New England, studied abroad in Chile, and returned to the Bronx to be a middle school teacher. I received a Truman Scholarship, a Fulbright, and a Soros Fellowship, and I could list more. But I won't. I earned my doctorate at Columbia University, and then I landed a job at Yale. I am proud of everything that I've been able to accomplish on my journey thus far. I have eternal imposter syndrome. Either I've been invited because I'm a token, which really isn't about me, but rather about a box someone needed to check off. Or I'm exceptional, which means I've had to leave the people I love behind. It's the price that I and so many others pay for learning while Black. I police myself all the time. Are my pants too tight? Should I wear my hair up or in a fro? Should I speak up for myself, or will the power of my words be reduced to, she's angry? Why did I have to leave the Bronx to gain access to a better education? And why, in the process of getting that better education, did I have to endure the trauma of erasing what made me me? A Black girl from the Bronx raised by an Antiguan mother. So when I think about our current education reform initiatives, I can't help asking, what are our students of color learning about themselves? Three decades of research reveal that students of color are suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than white students, and are punished in harsher ways for the same infractions. They also learn this through the absence of their lives and narratives in the curricula. The Cooperative Children's Book Center did a review of nearly 4,000 books and found that only 3% were about African Americans. And they further learned this through the lack of teachers that look like them. An analysis of data from the National Center for Education Statistics found that 45% of our nation's pre-K to high school students were people of color, while only 17% of our teachers are. Our youth of color pay a profound price when their schooling sends them the message that they must be controlled, that they must leave their identities at home in order to be successful. Every child deserves an education that guarantees the safety to learn in the comfort of one's own skin. It is possible to create emotionally and physically safe classrooms where students also thrive academically. I know because I did it in my classroom when I returned to teach in the Bronx. So what did that look like? I centered my instruction on the lives, histories, and identities of my students. And I did all of this because I wanted my students to know that everyone around them was supporting them to be their best self. So while I could not control the instability of their homes, the uncertainty of their next meal, or the loud neighbors that kept them from sleep, I provided them with a loving classroom that made them feel proud of who they are, that made them know that they mattered. You know, every time I hear or say the word asking, I'm in high school again. I'm thinking about ass and king and putting the two together so that I speak in a way where someone in power will want to listen. There's a better way, one that doesn't force kids of color into a double bind, a way for them to preserve their ties to their families, homes, and communities, a way that teaches them to trust their instincts and to have faith in their own creative genius. Thank you.
Okay, so I mean, I've watched that video, I don't know how many times, and every time, I listen to it, I get the chills. Something different pops up to me, a different memory comes to mind of my own experience in school. So it's an amazing video, and I cannot watch it enough. But it's really what I think for us, as a team, was that impetus for change and thinking about we need to do something differently. And so in our breakouts, and Susan is going to be the tech person, we're going to take about 10 minutes to discuss the following prompts. And I believe Susan did drop them in the chat. What resonated with you as you heard Dr. Simmons talk? Thinking about her own experience, was she feeling seen, safe, and loved? And then what ways do we support students in being seen, safe, and loved? What else is needed? So we'll take about 10 minutes and then we'll come back together and we'll share out briefly and then keep going. Okay, well, welcome back. I thought before we kind of move on and I start sharing the slide deck again, just to lift what came up in some of your spaces, maybe getting one or two people who would be willing to just share out any one of the prompts, not one in particular, just what came up as you discussed the video. And I'm a former teacher, so I have good wait time.
I guess I'd like to, hopefully my group mates don't mind, but I guess I'd like to share sort of I guess a word that resonated with me. I'm not even sure that she said it, but she did it when she went to be a middle school teacher again. Was this intentionality? Like I think our programs, like in MSCR and Urban League, are already built around the idea, and PASS as well, already sort of built around the idea of SEL. But it's just like, do we always have it at the forefront, and are we being intentional about what we're doing in the programs we're doing? So it doesn't necessarily mean we have to change curriculum or create new clubs and activities, but we need to just really be more intentional thinking about how we're building aspects of SEL and student identity and belonging and relationships into our programming.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing it. And you do bring up this good point, because we also want to lift the piece as we talk about this work of like, this is also living in some of what we already do. So it's not like you said necessarily we have to change everything up. I mean, we are relooking at our curriculum just because, it's, over 11 years old now. But yeah, it is also lifting like, what we do, but then how are we bringing greater attention and focus to it, and keeping it fresh too. So. Maybe get one more and then we can proceed.
For me, it's not my first time watching this video. I think this is an awesome video. I think we watched it for training for AmeriCorps, which is great. One thing that resonated with me is that I had the experience of growing up in Chicago and then coming to Wisconsin when I was getting older. So I had similar experiences of like getting in trouble for speaking Spanish in class and being corrected all the time. But I think that helps me have a good perspective of supporting our students and always being with the intention of having them feel safe and seen and respected and honored.
Thank you for sharing that, Miles. Yeah, it's that deep relational connection piece, and also that work of like, how do we connect with students? Oftentimes it's finding kind of what our experiences were to bridge and make that connection to do the work. So I really appreciate you lifting that deeply relational piece, Miles. Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts? I don't want to limit it to two, but I also know just coming into a space, it can be difficult to share at times. Okay. Let me go.
I was in a group with 2 AmeriCorps members and then 1 site director, but all of them are doing virtual programming right now with students. And so I just thought they had like a really unique perspective on like, as a person who's working with kids 100% virtually, like right now, like today, tomorrow, in real time, how does this apply? And Ian brought up a great point around, in the video, it's like, was she feeling seen and heard? And he was talking about the challenge of like, if a student isn't turning on their camera and muting themselves, like it's really tough to have them feel seen and heard. And then we talked a little bit about kind of how do you create that space or invite that space and make it welcoming, and that it's just so different virtually than what it would be like in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what we do kind of brick and mortar, and that's the rub of this work is like, you're really planning for 2 spaces of like when we're back together, and then also like virtually, and what does this look like, and how do we connect with students? And even more concerning, those students who aren't logging on, what are their experiences, and what's going on for them, and how do we try to connect with them? So absolutely, thank you. Okay. Let me go back to sharing here. Okay, let me just scroll back here. I was just looking at what was ahead. So these next few slides are, once again, some of you are already familiar with this. You've engaged with doing the work. But it's always good to circle back, to, the why of SEL. And so once again, kind of engaging the research folks in this space, and really just establishing the why SEL is important. And so looking at the impacts both on academics as well as, high school, the social, like academic piece, as well as the high social and emotional competencies that SEL supports. So And then engaging that social aspect of SEL, I mean, which is, once again in the name, but really calling out that, that need for people to feel those connections. And in order, for that higher learning and that cognition to happen, humans, they need to feel connected. And they need to, like going back to that brain slide, they need to feel, safe and loved and heard. So this is just a definition out of UNESCO regarding the why of SEL in terms of social connections. And so now as we think and we engage more deeply into, SEL with a transformative lens, and we've been very, explicit in messaging that, we're not calling this transformational SEL, because then it kind of almost gives the idea of like, this is a new thing to do SEL. It's, a brand new, shiny object that we're going to do. And then in a couple of years, it's going to be something new versus like, SEL with a transformative lens is just the water we swim in. It's our ways of being with each other. So it's not this like new program or thing. It is just kind of our mindsets, our beliefs. It's like who we are. So we've been very intentional in messaging that this is not a new way of doing SEL. It's just really looking at that relational aspect of SEL, understanding the importance of context, understanding the importance of social political identity. So when we talk about SEL with a transformative lens, it's rooted in these areas: justice, culture, identity, agency, belonging, engagement, anti-racist and abolitionist practices. So right now as a district, we are building out the justice portion of SEL with a transformative lens for professional development. And it's connected with Maisha Wynn's book called Justice on Both Sides, which talks about the 5 pedagogical stances to transform to a more restorative culture. And the 5 areas are language matters, justice matters, race matters, language matters, and futures matters. So what we're doing is we're building out modules based on those 5 pedagogical stances that connect that with social emotional learning from a justice-oriented lens. Any questions on that?
Can you just say her name again?
Maisha Wynn. I
Wynn.
believe, and if she's not in the resource list at the end of the slide deck, I think I forgot to put her book in there. I will add it and share the slide. It's W-I-N-N.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So once again, we talk about, SEL, and we really, once again, going back to intent. We really want this to be about the process and not necessarily a product that, at the end of this, you're going to be, you're going to have this, set of lesson plans. Yes, we do have that, but really we're trying to focus on those mindsets, beliefs, and values, and understanding that this is a process in a journey. And it's really about how are we, tending to mindsets and that inner work that we need to do as adults, and as well as supporting that in students. So it's that idea of dual tracking. What we're doing with students, we're also doing with ourselves. And it's authentic relationships and community building, identity, and then racial and social justice. So just a brief moment here to pause. And once again, utilizing the chat, thinking about the work that you do in your after school program or in your organization. How do you see these 4 areas coming alive in your spaces? And what do you think might need some attention? So let's just take about maybe 2 minutes here. I just kind of popped in the chat of, in MMSD, a lot of what we've been doing just from our district PD with our coaches is really having a touch point at every meeting that talks about mindset and inner work, or touches on authentic relationships. So each of those bubbles are built into our professional learning for our PBIS coaches. And I don't know about you, for any organization being a large school district, I think what needs attention is just being able to tend to it because of time and the constraints that we have for time. So how do we balance kind of the priorities that kind of live in the academic world or kind of mandated from DPI? And then how do we also find that time to build this work and be intentional about it? It happens, but we're not often intentional about it, kind of going back to what Ian was saying. Any other thoughts or anything someone wants to put into the space?
Well,
I should have, go ahead.
well, just one thing I was thinking about was.
You're on mute.
Just more of a question now that I'm thinking about is, there are some examples of programming within our programming, so smaller windows of our program that embody all of these things in a really strong way. But just so the question is like, how do we build on that and kind of expand it across to all programs in a more holistic way? Just a thought that I'm having.
Yeah. Absolutely. And also too, when you think about that adult SEL, like what are the opportunities from staff to be able to do, some of this work as well, and have that, I think, vulnerability too of like sharing, their own identity, their own experiences. So how do we also create the space for that to happen as well? So. I should tell you that this is a very video heavy. The district version of this actually had some pre-reads that schools could choose from. But because, pre-reads can always be challenging. I know you all have pretty busy schedules. I did, adopt some of the videos we use. So when we did these modules as a district, schools could kind of choose their own adventure. Could go kind of a video route. So the slide you can use this video, here's prompts that you can do. They also had several readings that they could choose from. And then they could also do breakouts around readings. But for the purposes of today, I did more of a video heavy thing. So we are going to watch another video, do a very similar process in breakouts in terms of just kind of lifting what resonated, and then thinking about some questions as you listen to the video about impact. Before we go into the video, I did want to, highlight and lift this piece of it starts with that inner work. And I discussed that in earlier slides of like, this is not a destination, it's a journey. And it's really about, as we think about SEL, it is about examining the mindsets and beliefs and values. I think it's something that we have not in the past taken a lot of time to do. And we're like, here are the lessons, here's how you do it, here's the technical piece. Go out and do it without really tending to like, how are you understanding this? How is this in line or not in line with, your own values and beliefs? And if they're not aligned, how do you navigate through that? So we're really taking a hard pause in terms of like social emotional learning through the lens of like lesson plans. We're still doing that piece. We're also taking, the same amount of time to really be in relationship with each other and talk about our underlying beliefs and values. And then it's about unlearning and learning, because we've all been socialized to believe that, the world works in a certain way. And some of the things that you're going to see, and especially in this next video and here, are very different than maybe what you've been taught or understood. So it's really about being open to unlearning and being vulnerable to relearning some things or hearing different perspectives that may not be in alignment with your core beliefs and values. And then lastly, this is a journey and not an event. So this next video, I always say it kind of hits right at the heart of, of social emotional learning and its impact on people of color. It's from the Abolitionist Teaching Network. And it was a video that came out, over the course, I think it was kind of early summer. And so I'm going to not speak too much to it because they do the speaking and they do it far better than I could. I'm going to share this video and then we'll come together into breakouts again. So let me.
That people are going to take this too lightly, like checking a box, having a workshop, reading one book, you know, and especially in your field of social emotional learning, that people are going to say, oh, well, we do social emotional learning, so that covers it. We're good. You've called that white supremacy with a hug. What do you mean by that?
So first of all, thank you for saying that. First of all, like, our schools are steeped in white supremacy. I think we made that really clear. So to me, I always tell people, it doesn't matter what your curriculum is. If you put it in a system without any lens that is abolitionist, that is anti-racist, it can be used as a weapon. So I think oftentimes social emotional learning and equity get conflated. They're like, but students are talking about their feelings. Like, you know, and I think it's important. I'm a proponent of social emotional learning if it doesn't create harm. We can use anything in education to create harm. And let me tell you, good intentions don't equal good outcomes, right? So people are like, but I meant well. Like, when I told you that you were articulate, like, I really just was meaning well. And like, your hair, and like, when I touched it, I thought it was like exotic. And I'm just like, y'all, that's a great intention, but you are harming me because what you've done is you dehumanized me. And so I think a lot of what we do, regardless of it's a SEL or mindfulness or any of these things, if the educator has not done the work, if the school is steeped in white supremacy, then guess what that curriculum is? A white supremacist curriculum. And so I said, if we don't apply an equity lens, a racial equity lens, an abolitionist lens, an anti-racist lens to racial justice lens, you name it, very easily SEL becomes white supremacy with a hug. Because what happens is now is SEL is being used as another way to distinguish Black children, you know, Black and brown children, everyone else, and white children. So now it's like, those students really don't know how to control themselves. We should do that SEL program with them, and then maybe they'll learn how to manage their behaviors. And they can have that self-control and stuff like that. But you can't talk about self and social awareness without talking about white supremacy, right? And when we talk about the narrative of social emotional learning, and we're thinking about how to apply that in more privileged schools and more white schools, what you get, our students need this for college and career readiness. So these two narratives of like why SEL is important is, again, how are we using a tool to further disenfranchise the already disenfranchised? So again, anything that you do without applying an abolition lens, an anti-racist lens, a racial justice lens, all of that stuff can be used as a weapon, and it can be used as a weapon of white supremacy. So don't come in here with that Trojan horse SEL talking about, but it's here for the kids, without doing that work. We need anti-racist healing. I just wrote a piece that if you can't, be trauma informed if you're not talking about racism. A lot of us, like me, I walk in with my racial trauma. I walk in when folks, have said something about the way I spoke or the way I pronounced things. But then you want to give me a hug you want to give me some trauma-informed instruction without addressing the trauma of racism, the trauma of white supremacy. So we're just like what you said, Bettina, we're just putting Band-Aids on. We need to understand that whatever you apply to a school system right now, the way it is, which is steeped in whiteness, is steeped in white supremacy, can very easily be used as a weapon. And so that's why, without that lens, SEL is white supremacy with a hug. You could put a smile in there too if you want, but.
Okay. So we're going to go into breakouts. And once again, the same prompts. I don't know, Susan, if you're able to drop in there. We're going to go into breakouts and probably take, since we have a little bit more time, maybe 15 minutes. I want to give people ample time to talk. Once again, going back to like what resonated as you listened to Dena Simmons talk, and what adjustments might need to be made to ensure that SEL is not perpetuating harm. And once again, this is coming from the lens of like how we're doing SEL as a district. So this may look very differently in terms of the discussions that you may be having in your group. So we'll take about 15 minutes and go into breakouts. I think we have everyone back. So welcome back again. So once again, just taking a moment to bring into the space, either via chat or speaking into the space, and maybe we'll do, one share here or two, whatever people are feeling. Reactions to that video. Or anything lifted in your groups.
I think a big commonality, what we talked about in our group was and I think it was Elena that said it the best, was with regard to SEL, it's almost, and everything else, in all honesty, within programs, it kind of feels like everything needs to be quantity over quality. And so other people were talking about, yeah, we have to show we serve this many kids in this many days, and we show this outcome by measuring this type of thing, but really we're just kind of pushing and checking that box so we can get that money, so we can keep trying to do what we're trying to do. But are we really doing what is best, and are we giving quality programming, and are we taking the time to actually build relationships when you have to serve this many kids, but you only get to spend 30 minutes with a kid instead of spending an hour with a kid, building that, stronger relationship in that bond. So I think that was kind of summed up a lot of the stuff we talked about, but there's a lot of good points in our group.
I'd also like to add, with that kind of rush or push of getting a certain number or doing certain programming, specifically SELs, without really thinking about it, it's you're continuing to perpetuate the things we're trying to avoid. And so I think the things are getting told from high above, and not even just supervisors, just from grants and things like that. But then what we're getting taught, or what we want to do and how we want to serve our kids, just doesn't allow. And I also think what Keisha said too, it's we just need more time, and we don't, it's how it's hard to just, I mean, time is very valuable. And so I think we haven't found a way to perfectly balance that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you both for sharing. Yeah, it's that hard rub of, it's the things you have to do and some of the checklisty things. And then how do you also have that kind of, fidelity to the student experience and student needs? And that's a balancing act I think we all find ourselves in, working in large organizations. There are the tasks that we have to do, and then the things that we know that we really need to get to that center our youth experiences. So thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts before I start sharing again?
Yeah, I can just quickly share one additional thought. So in addition to what's already been shared, we kind of reflected on some within programming conversations that folks were having with their students to really give student voice and empower them within the spaces. But then what really has to happen is follow up to that. So having a conversation in a vacuum and then not changing anything or taking any of the feedback into consideration when structuring things moving forward just basically perpetuates the message that students don't actually have a voice, and we're just doing it to check something off a list.
Yep. Yeah, an authentic and genuine student voice. I mean, it's one thing to get the voice, but then what do you do with it? And kids know, if you're listening, or if, you're listening to what they say, and if they're having an impact. So absolutely, thanks. Okay, let's start sharing again. So once again, just going back to, kind of the why of the SEL, and even now being in this virtual, space, and kind of not knowing when we're going back, but really how are we tending to, building those connections and cultivating relationships that really are centered on the humanity of our children. And then going and affirming and supporting those social emotional needs. So once we know, once we hear, how are we affirming that? How are we validating what, students are saying? And it goes back to what I've heard people lift throughout our time together today of really, really centering those student voices. and thinking about that development, of our youth and knowing those developmental stages that they're in, especially as we look towards, reaching those years, where peers are far more important than what any adult has to say. How are we continuing to keep those connections going? Then once again, the last piece of really supporting that culturally sustaining and equitable learning environment that allows that vulnerability, joy, and healing to occur, because we do, a lot of our students are, often faced with, some tough situations in their lives. So where do they have those opportunities to express their vulnerability or have that joy or even talk about how might I start healing? You may not heal completely, but I saw once in one of our schools that I went to visit that, healing starts with listening. So how do we start on that first step in that journey towards healing? And really talking about this piece of kind of, I put in a little bubble here because, like SEL really needs to happen across all grade levels. I think sometimes this idea by the time the kids get a certain age, they should know this or be able to do this, or, SEL is for younger kids, but it's really across all grade levels and even talking about the adults in our building. So, okay. And then just semi-closing things out, one last video I promise, and this is not going to be a breakout, but I wanted to get back to this piece, and I heard this idea of like student voice. It's really kind of coming full circle and really understanding too, that our students have what they need. I mean, it's our job to kind of cultivate and foster their social emotional growth, but our students have these skills that we look for. It's just like, how do we bring it out? How do we center it? How do we acknowledge that it's a skill? I mean, I think time and time again about this idea of perseverance. And I always come back to this story that really, resonated with me about a student who, lived on the west side of Madison. At some point in the year, the family moved to the other side of town, but he wanted to stay, at his high school. And so he would have to take, 2 or 3 buses. I think it was like 3 buses to get from that far kind of northeast side to get to the west side. And oftentimes, he would be late, and the first thing he was greeted with is like, you're late again, versus like, look at all the steps that this child took just to get here, and that this place means something to him. And there's a reason why he would get up early in the morning, take, 3 buses, get off at the transfer point. That's a certain level of perseverance and resilience, that we don't always affirm and acknowledge. So I wanted to kind of leave this session with the idea of, the student voice. And so I have a few pictures here of some student activists across the country, as well as right here in Madison, coming off the summer of protest and response to the murder of George Floyd. We saw unprecedented leadership by our youth who were out there leading the protest, raising money, talking to the media about racial and social injustice. And those are all skills that are social emotional learning skills and that they're exhibiting. And then across the country, we have Autumn Pelletieri, who is a First Nations youth who talks about preserving water and land. Most of you are familiar with Greta Thunberg. And then there's also Trinity Neal, who is a 12-year-old transgender activist, and as well as Little Miss Flint, who is Mari Copens, who really advocates for clean water in Flint, Michigan, which they still do not have clean water. So I'm going to leave you lastly with this video from a Milwaukee Public School student, Desani Nelson, in talking and advocating for the restoration of music in their schools. Okay, let me make sure I have sound here.
I am a junior at Milwaukee High School. I'm a junior. Hello, my name is Desani Nelson, Nelson. I am a junior at Milwaukee High School. I'm a junior at Milwaukee High School of the Arts, and I came here to beg you to add music back to Milwaukee Public Schools. Music is something that is not only important to me, but so many others in this city. It is something that ties us together despite what language we speak, how much money your parents make, what you have or don't have. It's something that allows you to be who you are, and music saved my life. When I was in 5th grade, I attempted suicide. It's been 5 years since, and every one of those 5 years since, I had music in my life. I went to LCA and joined the choir in my 7th grade year. Before that, I was in orchestra. And I learned in those classes not only how to play an instrument or how to sing choral music, I learned how to love myself and love the people around me. I learned that my life was worth something, that I was beautiful and enough for the people around me. And despite what people told me, that I was a good person. And despite what people told me, I could do anything. And it wasn't the music on the top 100 chart. It wasn't the music that seemed popular. It was traditional core music. It was the music written by those 100 years ago that wouldn't even see me standing here and be proud. It was music written by men that would never know my name, that wouldn't care if they did, but that music saved me. And it can save so many kids. So I beg you, think of the kids that have nothing, the kids that know nothing, the kids that don't believe in themselves and that don't understand that the world lied to them when it told them that they weren't beautiful and enough. Think of them when you decide this, because you can save a life today.
So I cannot say it any better than that, and I will not try. So every time I watch a video, I start tearing up, so I'm not going to do that. Just coming back again full circle. Our youth have what they need. So I'm going to leave that in closing. So there's resources attached to the slide deck. So Susan, I will leave that to you to share with folks. They can access some of the resources that were referenced, as well as some of the resources we've been using in the district. And just lastly, I'm going to leave it to you if you want to close it out, Susan. Any thoughts?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. Let's all, big applause for Cynthia for your time, for your leadership in the district and really in our whole city, because we're all going to feel the effects of this work in our own selves, hopefully, and then in the kids that we're working with and our peers, right? Are there questions before we dive in here? I mean, and maybe even here is a good place to start with just like, what's a concept that really stood out for you in the presentation that you're going to hold on to?
And I can drop them in a chat if we want to face each other. I know it's kind of awkward having the screen sharing.
Oh, sure. That's a great idea. Thank you. So yeah, I'm just looking for folks to go around. Let's all say some words together in this whole space. So just one of the pieces that you're gonna, maybe it's a phrase you heard someone say, Cynthia, maybe one of the videos, something that really, resonated with you.
I think one thing from the first video that was shared that she said was she paid a price for learning while Black. For me, that was, probably nothing that I haven't ever heard, but maybe said with different words, but just maybe it was just through her video or just those specific words really kind of resonated with me. And it's obviously something that, we're aware of, that a lot of times kids of color do have to pay a certain kind of price, but I think just to hear an adult say it maybe was just a little bit more like powerful, or I don't know, just resonated with me. I don't know.
Well, so I'll add also from Dena Simmons, she talked about editing who you are to be accepted, to be exceptional. She talked about that internal imposter syndrome. And so just really realizing that I need to dig into that to to explore how do I help not be about that, and how do I raise up everyone? She talked about that when she was talking about being exceptional, and therefore she then loses parts of life, the people in her life. And how do we do that with kids, where we keep everybody up at the exceptional level? We find their exceptionalness. We help them find their exceptionalness. So we're all moving together through it. Yeah. I'm gonna get us to just popcorn this. So I'm gonna call on Ileana, sorry.
I think the thing that stands out, and I watched Meg Olson do this at my school, so this was kind of like the second time watching the videos, and I would say that the whole white supremacy in SEL is pretty huge for me, just because it was a concept I haven't heard really before that. And even with my past experience of career-wise stuff, I never felt like SELs really worked. They felt very artificial and fluffy and not like tangible. And so it wasn't easy for me, but it was also kind of well, this is the steps I have to take. And so this is what I'm going to do. And not really make any change, but I also didn't feel like I had any words to kind of connect why it wasn't connecting. And so when I heard about that, I was like, okay, that makes a lot more sense, how the stuff we're teaching them is seeped in this tiny box that's not really accessible for every person, and it doesn't work with every person. And to think that it does, and to kind of glaze over the fact that it doesn't, is doing a disservice and ultimately negatively impacting our Black and Brown students. So I would say that's a huge suitcase to unpack and to keep working at. But that is something I want to keep working on and keep learning about. But more specifically, looking at the program I have, or the programs MSCR has, and looking at what is steeped in that white supremacy, and what can we be doing to change that. Also back to the quantity over quality, we should be having quality programming. And what does that look like? How do we see students? How do we reach students? And how can we do that in our program? So I think for me, it's the biggest takeaway is how are we going to keep doing that, and not just having one conversation about it and then having another conversation about something, you know what I mean? Just kind of keep building on it.
For sharing. I just want to say too, and that may be a new phrase for some folks. Tima Okun and Kenneth Jones have this article that's connected to dismantling racism, called The Characteristics of White Supremacy Culture, some of which you all touched on when you were talking about quantity over quality. That's one of the tenets. So if you're interested in their work, I suggest checking it out.
I will popcorn to Alexandria.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that what I will be applying to my work after this is just the reminder that this is constant work, reevaluating my process, and there are always doors that I could open for student leadership and for leadership from other areas of the community. And as a leader of a program, it's my job to be conscious of that and not ever settle into a system. And I will popcorn to Ian.
Yeah, I think what I'll take away was probably even more from one of the breakout groups than one of the videos and discussions. And I think some of what's already been said, but really thinking about taking it the next step from listening and hearing what people's experiences but to making real change, and maybe finding ways to have those personal experiences lead to that change, and not like my interpretation or the system's interpretation of those experiences moving the change. So that, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Can you popcorn to somebody?
Oh yeah, sorry. Well, just because it's fun for me, I'm going to go to Ian.
I think like two related things I'll take away are just that like good intentions and conversation aren't enough by themselves, that there really needs to be follow through, and then like accountability on like the actual outcomes, no matter like what your intentions were. And so like just like kind of the need for like reflection and like critical thinking as you're like practicing this, that you can't just like assume because you're like implementing SEL that you're like actually improving like the outcomes for your students. That yeah, and I'll pass it to Bonnie.
Thanks, Ian. I was making a sound about what you said, but I'm on mute, so you couldn't hear it. Something that I'm thinking about is just the kind of like what we say versus what we do. And I think I started thinking about at the beginning, Cynthia, with one of the slides that talked about like explicitly teaching SEL, but then also incorporating it within like classes that are already happening. And it's not that it's one or the other, but probably a combination of both. But I think that's just really helpful for me for thinking about sort of like, how do we model these skills? And it's great to have a lesson on emotion management, but if in the heat of a moment you like aren't able to model that in like a healthy and productive way, it's sort of like, what does the lesson really mean? So yeah, I'm just thinking about that and more about, as like youth workers, how do we do our own work on this so that we can model some of the SEL skills that we're teaching explicitly or within a class. And I will popcorn to Anna.
I just, what Ian said, Ian O'Connor said, resonated with me. And yeah, I think what I got from this training is having, I guess, better like rebuttals for people when sometimes I'll be in discussions and then they'll be like, oh, their intentions were this way. Like I should give them the benefit of the doubt, when it's like, well, their intentions were rooted in something that's not good, and we need to discuss that. And so like, I'm sorry, I don't need to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so that's kind of what I got from that. And I can't remember. John, did you go yet?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
So the one slide that I was thinking a lot about was the race, rigor, and relationships slide. And I was just thinking about like how we can balance high expectations with like still being understanding and meeting students like where they're at. So like I don't need to like lower expectations for like what we want to accomplish too much. And I think Billy Joe, have you gone?
I think we're all good. I definitely, there's a moment or two, if anyone has anything that came up for them as you were listening to each other. Also kind of just want to ask you to be ruminating about this, a bit of, you know, that it's really serendipity that the school district is doing this discovery work, doing this pulling apart old definition, old previous attempts at SEL, and trying to be taking it through that transformative lens, just at the same time that MOST is trying to look at this. And I think I have a question in my head about like, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. You know, how's their wheel look to you? Do you think you could put it on your car and drive really well, you know, or your bike, or, you know, so that's one thing that we'll be talking about ourselves when we come back, because if we feel like, I mean, there's some really chunky stuff here, just to put it into middle schooler words, you know, and so is that, will it work in our organizations? Will it work in your practice? And that'll be what we'll be doing together at future times. So thanks a lot for all joining. I'm going to be sending out, there's a couple other opportunities in December that are related to social emotional learning, cultural responsive practice, sending those out to y'all. And then probably in January, I'm going to try to do what I'm calling just kind of orientation meetings, where we'll get to have really conversation about what do we want to do over the next couple of months as we continue on in this smaller project within the project. Okay. Great.
Thank you, everyone. And sorry, I do have to run to my next meeting, but thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate you seeing some of y'all again.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cynthia.
All right. And thank you, everyone.